The takeover, the Caitlin Clark takeover continues as Caitlin Clark has incredible news ahead of the start of this WNBA season. And we also have to get into Sophie Cunningham not being protected by the Indiana Fever in this fantasy draft. Welcome to
what it means to just put one foot in front of the other, to persevere, to welcome people into the fold, to not give in to circumstance, to lead with grace and dignity, to sacrifice for a greater good and a common good.
Something didn't sit right the moment the whisper started. Because when your franchise player suddenly becomes the center of a quiet storm right before a new season, it is never just basketball anymore. It is power. It is money. It is ego. And right now, all of it seems to be orbiting around Caitlin Clark like a pressure cooker that is one bad decision away from exploding. Because here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. If everything inside Indiana is perfectly fine, then why does it feel like pieces are already being moved before the first game is even played?
All good just a week ago. Maybe 3 weeks ago, right? WNBA offseason slowly winding down as we're getting into FIBA basketball. Anticipation's building up. We're about to see Caitlin Clark touch the floor again. It's been 8, nearly 9 months since we've seen her hoop. She comes out game 1 against Senegal. Bang, double-double, 17 points, 12 assists. Game 2 rolls around, and then we think to ourselves, man, we didn't miss this. And what is this? Stephanie White. Caitlin Clark.
The rumor that Sophie Cunningham could be on her way out did not come from nowhere. It did not just magically appear because fans were bored. It came from a growing sense that the Fever are trying to reshape themselves around Caitlin Clark in a way that might leave some familiar faces on the outside looking in.
I'm going to break down why the Fever may not protect Sophie Cunningham when it comes to expansion draft. Number one, Sophie Cunningham is not under contract, so even if they protect her, they may lose her anyway. So protecting her is for what? You know what I'm saying? So you'll waste a protection. Number two, protect the players who are under contract. So the players under contract is KK, Michaela Timpson. I have to say that because some fans don't know what KK is. Come on now. KK is her nickname.
And when that kind of reshaping starts, it usually means one thing. Someone inside the organization has decided the current formula is not good enough. But that immediately raises a bigger, more uncomfortable question. If the formula is broken, then why is Stephanie White still the one holding the clipboard?
It's getting real. It's getting real for you very, very fast. And I can't even lie, you did this to yourself. You did this to yourself. Stephanie White under major fire. It is a microscope on you. The Indiana Fever have put Stephanie White on alert. They are watching you like a hawk. And if you make any missteps, in regards to Caitlin Clark in this franchise situation, you are about to be out of the door.
Because that is where things start getting complicated and honestly a little suspicious. There's been a quiet but persistent frustration among fans who watch what happened during the international circuit, especially at the FIBA qualifier tournament in Puerto Rico. What was supposed to be a showcase turned into something that felt more like a social experiment gone wrong.
Caitlin Clark playing off ball. Nah, that smells like Stephanie White. Caitlin Clark playing the small forward. And that reeks like Stephanie White. Wait, why is Caitlin Clark the 4 in this lineup? Definitely seems like Stephanie White. Wait, why are we not pushing the pace when Caitlin Clark's in the game? That is very reminiscent of Stephanie White. Stephanie White. We didn't miss you, Stephanie. We missed Caitlin Clark. And then we get news from Scott Agnes following FIBA basketball. Scott, Fever fans, Stephanie White, Tamika Catching, Debbie Antonelli are serving as ESPN game analysts for the women's basketball tournament.
Instead of letting Caitlin Clark do the one thing that made her a generational talent, which is controlling the game as a point guard and floor general, she was pushed into an off-ball role that looked completely unnatural. And not just unnatural, but almost deliberate. This was not a case of a player adjusting to a system. This was a system bending in a way that seemed designed to reduce her impact. The ball was not in her hands. The tempo was not hers to dictate. Possessions would unfold with Clark standing on the perimeter, watching, waiting, and often being completely iced out by players who seemed far more interested in running their own sets than maximizing the most dangerous offensive weapon on the court. Fans noticed. Some believe it was an attempt to balance the team, to make sure veteran players maintain their roles and hierarchy. Others see it as something more political. An old guard protecting its territory from a new superstar who is changing the entire ecosystem of the sport. Either way, Stephanie White's name keeps coming up in those conversations, and not in a flattering way.
Saying something when your counterpart is feeling bad for us because of how we're getting treated. I mean, come on. And that's from leadership. That's from, I'll just leave it there. From our leadership, it's just bad. When fans and players, especially players, when we're competing at the highest level and it's like a battlefield out there, when we're agreeing on the court because of how awful the officials are, like that's saying something. Like, listen to us. We're not going to come for your heads, but I think there is room for improvement to change the criteria when the whole league is asking for it. But when the league...
So now people are asking, why is she still the head coach of the Fever if that same philosophy could carry over into the WNBA season? Because if that approach shows up again in Indiana, it could derail everything before it even begins. And this is where Sophie Cunningham's situation suddenly becomes more than just a roster decision. Because Cunningham is not just another player. She is the kind of personality that brings edge, energy, and a certain unpredictability that can either fuel a team or create friction depending on how it is managed. If the Fever are truly trying to build a system that revolves around Caitlin Clark having full control, then every piece around her has to fit that vision. No exceptions. But here's the twist. There is growing belief that Sophie Cunningham might not even want that kind of deal under those circumstances. The Supermax sound impressive, but it comes with expectations, pressure, and often a situation that is not necessarily ideal in terms of team competitiveness. So, what happens if she is not cored? She becomes free to sign anywhere.
Caitlin Clark is scheduled to appear on NBC Sunday, March 29th as a special contributor for the network's Basketball Night in America pregame show. She'll provide commentary and analysis alongside Maria Taylor and NBA Hall of Famers Carmelo Anthony, Vince Carter, and T-Mac Tracy McGrady. This will be for the New York Knicks versus Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and the Oklahoma City Thunder. Caitlin Clark takeover continues. I mean, why not? We got Stephanie White going and doing NCAA announcements and all types of stuff. She's not even focused on who we protecting.
And suddenly, the Fever re-enter the picture in a completely different way. Instead of losing her outright, they could potentially bring her back on a much more team-friendly deal, somewhere at a range of $625,000 to $650,000, which is also being floated as a similar range for Lexi Hall. That kind of salary structure would allow Indiana to maintain flexibility while still keeping valuable pieces around Caitlin Clark. But that only works if everyone involved is aligned on the same vision. And right now, alignment is exactly what feels uncertain. Because while the front office might be thinking about contracts, cap space, and long-term planning, fans are still stuck on a much simpler concern. Will Caitlin Clark actually be allowed to play her game? It sounds ridiculous to even ask that question about a player of her caliber, but recent events have made it impossible to ignore. Music. The fear is not that Clark will fail. The fear is that she will be held back. And nothing frustrates a fan base more than the idea of wasted potential, especially when that potential is not just about winning games, but about transforming the entire league. Caitlin Clark is not just another star. That is why every coaching decision, every rotation, every offensive set is now under a microscope. And that brings everything back to Stephanie White.
Clark and Aaliyah Boston, they're under contract. Now, you want to protect Lexi Hall because she's a restricted free agent, but you still want to keep her because that way you can have some form of negotiation with her. Because she's a restricted free agent, and that means that even though she's able to be a free agent and go to a different team, the Fever has a chance to negotiate and match offers. So that's why you want to protect Lexi Hall. Everybody else is free game. And Sophie Cunningham, unfortunately, she only had a one-year deal. She's free game. That's the logic behind it.
Because if the perception continues to grow that she is not the right coach to maximize Caitlin Clark, then the pressure is only going to intensify. It will not matter how early it is in the season or how many adjustments are promised. The narrative will already be set, and narratives in sports are incredibly difficult to reverse once they gain momentum. At the same time, there is another layer to this entire situation that makes it even more fascinating. The other players are watching, not just on the Fever, but across the league, because whether anyone wants to admit it or not, Caitlin Clark's presence has shifted the balance of power. Players who have spent years building their reputations are now sharing the spotlight with someone who walked into the league and immediately became its biggest draw. That kind of shift does not happen quietly. It creates tension. It creates competition. And that feeling is driving the entire conversation right now, which is why the Sophie Cunningham situation feels like more than just a contract negotiation. It feels like a signal. If she stays, it suggests continuity, maybe even compromise. If she leaves, it could indicate a more aggressive reshaping of the roster around Clark's style and preference.
Pours in for Fever coach Stephanie White amid backlash. Indiana Fever fans are rallying behind coach Stephanie White after some intense criticism. The intense criticism? Fans saying, why aren't you paying attention to your team? Wait. On second thought, why is the Indiana Fever brass letting you do this? That makes me a little bit skeptical of the actual organization itself. I mean, I really wouldn't see Bill Belichick or Nick Saban really doing this. I wouldn't see. This is interesting.
And right now, everyone is trying to read between the lines, because the truth is this is not just about one player or one coach. It is about the direction of an entire franchise at a moment when the spotlight has never been brighter. The Fever are no longer a team that can quietly rebuild in the background. Every move they make is being watched, analyzed, and debated in real time. And Caitlin Clark is at the center of all of it, which brings us back to the original bombshell. Because when a player like Clark speaks, even subtly, it carries weight. It shapes expectations. It influences decisions. And it can shift the entire narrative of a season before a single game is played. Not now. Not with this much attention. It will be a very public, very expensive lesson in what happens when you fail to recognize exactly what you have. And right now, the clock is already ticking. And the scariest part for Indiana is that the clock is not just ticking quietly in the background anymore. It is ticking loudly, publicly, and with an audience that is growing by the day. Because once expectations reach this level,